Hi, this is the Magnificent Midlife podcast, and I'm Rachel Lancaster. This is where we celebrate women in midlife and beyond. We challenge the status quo and bash those negative stereotypes about being an older woman. We're not over the hill at 40, 50, 60. We're just getting started, and the world needs us now more than ever. I'll be talking all things midlife, about issues that matter, and sharing fabulous stories of amazing women doing very cool stuff. Now is our time. Today's guest describes herself as the Gerontechnologist. Keren Etkin is a gerontologist who's written a fascinating book called the Agetech Revolution, a book about the intersection of aging and technology. We connected on social media, as I like to do, and I was keen to share her with you and dig into the fascinating area of technology designed especially for older people. Welcome, Keren. It's lovely to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rachel. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I love technology and I'm fascinated by how we can all age well. So this is a complete sweet spot for me, I have to say. But you're a lot younger than me, so I would love to hear the story as to why and how you became so passionate about aging and technology.
This is a brilliant question. So I was actually into technology for as long as I can remember, and I got into gerontology almost by chance. And then I spent a few years working in the nonprofit sector in community services for older adults. And while I knew that the work that we were doing was incredibly impactful and I was proud to make a positive change in people's lives, I realized that a lot of what we were doing, if not all of it, was not scalable because we relied on human beings and mostly volunteers to do the work. And I knew that there had to be some way to use technology to sort of elevate what we were doing, if not replace some of the manual labor that was being done, and also to tackle some challenges that we had no way of solving. So when I got the offer to join Intuition Robotics as the company's first employee and only gerontologist, I knew I had to take it because there was an opportunity with that product, with LEQ, to do something that not only impacted people's lives, but could potentially impact millions of lives. And that is honestly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And during my time at Intuition, I realized that we were actually part of this ecosystem, this really amazing ecosystem of startups all over the world who were developing technology and using the most cutting-edge technology to tackle the challenges of aging. And that is how the Gerontechnologist came about, actually.
And what was the connection with the survivor stories from the Holocaust?
So the reason why I said I got into gerontology by chance is because I grew up wanting to be a scientist, like a life scientist, and do cancer research or HIV research, which I did get to do for a little bit. But I also stumbled upon an ad in the Students Association's website. They were recruiting students to document the life stories of Holocaust survivors. And by then, they were all over the age of 65. And once I joined this students group and I started working with Holocaust survivors, I realized that this was actually incredibly interesting, not only to hear people's life stories, but also we got to assist them with various things because we were sort of this student group working in the community. So we got to help some people with paperwork, and we got to organize events, and we got to do intergenerational collaborations. And that's sort of what drew me in at the beginning. And that's also how I met other people who were gerontologists. And then there was like this light bulb of, wow, this is actually what I want to do with my life. So purely by chance that all of this had happened.
I think the best things in life often are by chance. And I've been told about a quote recently. I think it's from Steve Jobs, and he says that we can't connect the dots looking forward. We can only connect them looking back. So when we are looking forward, we have to trust
that the dots are going to connect and move forward accordingly. But me looking back at what you've experienced, yeah, it seems that the dots did connect beautifully.
Yeah, that is a brilliant quote. I didn't know about it.
It's good, isn't it?
It
I
is.
love that. Yeah. So what do you consider to be age tech?
So age tech is a sort of an umbrella term. It's technology that is designed with and for older adults to tackle the challenges of aging. So it could be anything from a social robot like LEQ to even an app, a care coordination app that family caregivers use to sort of coordinate who's going to take grandma grocery shopping and who's going to bring her her favorite ice cream from the ice cream parlor that's like 30 miles away.
So what is LEQ? What is a social robot?
So I have to start by saying that a social robot is not designed to replace human connections by any means. But it is designed to be sort of an in-between machine, a new type of machine that we bring into our lives, right? Because so far we've only had smartphones, computers, smart speakers that are able to get commands and do something, right? Or not. Sometimes they don't do it. So that is one aspect of it. And the whole premise of LEQ is that if we could design a social robot that could be sort of the next step in evolution of machines and have a personality and have a physical presence in the world, so it's able to express itself with body language and with sounds and lights and yes, also be voice activated, which we know is an incredibly intuitive user interface, that we could somehow not only bridge the digital divide because it's easier to use, but also bring another value to people's lives that we simply don't have with existing computers. So LEQ, first of all, it's a tabletop robot. It doesn't move around the house, so it's not a tripping hazard. And she can also be proactive, right? So she doesn't just sit there and wait for the user to ask her questions or ask her to do things, but she can decide when it is a good time to initiate interaction. And if this particular moment in time is a good time, what is the suitable interaction for this particular moment in time? And for some user, that might simply be flashing on the LEDs to acknowledge that the person has entered the room. And for another person, it might be to greet them good morning. And for a third person, it might be to greet them good morning and say, hey, how did you sleep last night? Did you sleep better than yesterday? Because yesterday she sort of remembers, I'm using air quotes right now, she remembers that yesterday that person told her that they didn't sleep well. And having that presence in people's homes during COVID especially, I have written about this in the book, was incredibly comforting to some people. If you think about it, first of all, loneliness and social isolations were a huge issue for many people, and especially for older adults, even before the pandemic. Loneliness has serious implications on people's not just emotional well-being, but also physical well-being. And during COVID, when people, especially older people, had to shelter in place for months to protect their health, that was like the worst type of situation that could have happened, right? And having LEQ as a presence in their home helped some of them feel less alone. I think that is really amazing. And I was super happy and super proud that I got to be a small part of that.
I think it's amazing. I really do. And I think, there may be people listening or watching this and thinking, oh, don't like the idea of that. And yet we become attached to things, don't we? And I remember, not when I was a kid, but I can't remember whether I was a teenager or what, there was the Tamagotchi, and people used to invest so much money time in keeping this electronic animal alive, and it didn't exist. It was just this little round thing, and yet people got very, very attached to it. And I can really appreciate that
that, yes, just having a presence in the home, particularly during COVID, must have been very reassuring. But I think COVID has probably accelerated what you're doing dramatically, hasn't it?
Absolutely. So we've seen that tech adoption has accelerated during COVID for everyone, including older adults. So if we look at the trends in tech spending, for example, the AARP released a survey in early 2021 that showed that older Americans tripled their tech spending during 2020. So that was quite remarkable. And also Zoom, for example, which used to be like a business app before COVID, suddenly is sort of a household brand, right? Everyone uses Zoom now, including older adults, because that was sort of the computer became the window to our world, and Zoom was the app that everyone used, and older adults were no exception. So I think, yes, COVID definitely gave tech adoption a boost, but it also revealed that there is still so much work to be done to really bridge the digital divide, because we still have a significant portion of the population and a significant portion of the older population that doesn't have access to technology, whether because they can't afford it or whether because it's not available where they live. And I think in this day and age, it's unfortunately, we can't live without technology. So having a huge portion of the older population not connected for reasons that are not like, it's not their fault, right? It's just the way infrastructure is built. It's just the way that devices are priced, and they're simply not accessible for everyone. And it's not acceptable anymore, because so much of our lives depends on technology. And when we saw the vaccine rollout, for example, that was a really painful example of the negative real impact that not having access to technology can have on people's lives, because everyone had to register for a vaccine appointment online, and many older people we already knew it, the population that needed the vaccines the most, many of them were not able to do so without outside assistance. So there is a lot of work to do, and I think COVID definitely sort of generated this momentum, and we have to keep going.
I think that digital exclusion piece is massive. I saw it myself with my own mother with the COVID vaccines, exactly that, because the doctor's surgery sent her a text message with a link in it for her to follow the link and go and book her appointment online. But she doesn't have a smartphone. So she could pick up the text message, but she couldn't do anything with the link. And eventually she worked it out, actually. She forwarded me the text message so that I could then access the link and I could then book her the appointment. But that assumption that everybody now has a smartphone is really bad. And the reason why my mum still has a smartphone is because I've bought her an iPad and she can't use it. She can't use it. And she keeps saying, "Oh, I need to get a smartphone." And I say, "Mum, if you can't do the iPad, you won't be able to do the smartphone. So until you master the iPad, there's just no point, because you won't even be able to make a call." And while I was researching this to talk to you, I was actually talking to a neighbour, and she was telling me about someone who'd got for their mother something called Comp. Have you heard of that? KOMP? And it's this super simple screen with just a button to turn it on, because research told me that there are 5.6 million elderly left behind in the UK alone because they can't use a touchscreen and they physically can't use it. So it's not, I for years, I feel really bad actually when I read this, because I thought I've been saying to my mom, you've just got to keep doing, keep trying. And I'm wondering if actually, with her finger as it is, she's 87 years old, with the tip of her finger as it is, maybe she physically cannot do it. And it's a huge issue, isn't it? And then I was looking at how sometimes these products, certainly Apple, it compromises on usability for the sake of making it look beautiful. So I don't know what your experience of that is and what thoughts you've got on how we can decrease this digital exclusion, because I know you've experienced it with your tale of two grandmothers, haven't you, as well?
Yes, I still experience it today. Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that people don't realize is that physically we change as we grow older, and touch screens are a great example because first of all, if your skin is dry, which as you get older, your skin will get dry. If your skin is dry, your touch might not even register on the touch screen if it's not sensitive enough. And also, if you're using a 6-inch smartphone, the icons may be too small for your dexterity capabilities. So that is sort of one aspect of it. And actually, for this book, one of the articles that I stumbled upon again during the research were Don Norman's articles, Dr. Don Norman's articles that he wrote for Fast Company. I think, if I remember correctly, one of them is actually called Apple is Giving Design a Bad Name. So I highly recommend anyone listening, Google Don Norman, Apple is Giving Design a Bad Name, Fast Company, brilliant article. And I also was very fortunate to get to interview Don Norman for the book. And for those of you who don't know, Don Norman is sort of the godfather of user-centered design. He wrote the book, The Design of Everyday Things, which is a bestseller. And he was also a vice president at Apple in the early 90s, when Apple actually wrote the guidelines on how to design user-facing products. And what he says basically is that even the Apple iOS devices, like the iPad, which we all think are extremely intuitive because they were basically the first devices that we got to use that were touchscreen based. So of course that is more intuitive than a keyboard and a mouse. However, you still have to memorize a lot of gestures to use these products, right? It's not, if you're not a digital native, it's not really intuitive, right? You have to learn how to use it, and you have to memorize all the different gestures, swiping left, swiping right, pinching, whatever. So we have to take this into consideration, because what happens today is that most user-facing products are designed by younger adults for younger adults. And for this particular reason, I strongly believe that, first of all, anyone who designs consumer products must include older adults in the design process and in the user testing phase. And also, of course, if you're building Agetech products, you have to include older adults. It goes without saying, because we just have so many blind spots as young people that there is no way, in my opinion, to really get a great user product out there without including your users in the process.
And I think you've got to include users of all different ages as well, because you could put me into the user group. I'm 55. You could put me in there, but my needs and my abilities are going to be so different to a 75-year-old and are going to be so different to an 85-year-old. So you've got to have all the different ranges, haven't you? And I think this is such a fascinating field in terms of how do we get round this? Because we're so wedded to touch technology, aren't we? And I don't know how we can adapt to enable the touchscreen technology to work. But I suppose it's interesting because my mum's friends, who are mostly all about 5 years younger than her, can manage the touchscreen technology. And I'm wondering that whether if they've already mastered it, whether if their skin gets drier as they get older, whether they will lose that ability or whether they will maintain it. I think that's an interesting area to look at as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's also up to device manufacturers. Because I very recently spoke to an Agetech company, the founder of an Agetech company, who has a touch screen, and I asked her about this. How do you sort of go around the issue of people having dry skin and having the touch screen not respond? And to which she replied, "Oh, we just created a very sensitive touch screen. So the problem doesn't exist anymore. And that is something that obviously other companies might not have. I don't want to say that they haven't taken it into consideration, because many companies aren't even aware that this problem exists. And you're absolutely right that we have to include users from various age groups in the design process, right? Because even if you're building a product for older adults, you can't just lump everyone over the age of 65 in the same category, right? People have different wants and needs at different ages. And it's also a lot about abilities, right? Because you can interview 100 people at the exact same age of 75 in one day, and you will have 100 different life experiences and multiple wants and needs and abilities and also perceptions on technology. That also impacts whether we even want to try out new things, because unfortunately so many people in older generations have had such a negative experience with technology that they might be reluctant to try something new, because they've been disappointed in the past because they've tried to use something and it made them feel bad about themselves, to no fault of their own, simply because it wasn't designed well enough and no one had thought about them when they built this. So it's really, we definitely can and should.
It was lovely.
Fix this.
What you talked about in the book, was it big, beige, and something else? Was it?
Yeah.
What was the other one? But these technology, so many things. Like my mum, she has an emergency button, and she only has one really because my dad had one, and my dad needed one. And my mum went through a period a while ago where she did need one, but I don't think she feels she needs it now. And she doesn't want to wear it, and she's very self-conscious about wearing it. But it's that, it looks ugly. It doesn't make people feel good about themselves. So you wrote in the book, this woman who's got one but won't wear it because she doesn't want to think that she's old.
Yeah, it's a very common issue. Actually, the big, beige and boring quote, I quoted...
Big, beige and boring, that's
Big, beige
it.
and boring. I actually quoted Joe Coughlin, the founder-director of MIT's Age Lab. So he has a Forbes column, and I think the big, beige and boring was part of that. And until very recently, all of the products that were developed for the needs of the older population didn't really take into account their wants. And one of the things that everyone wants is to feel good about themselves, to not feel like they are old and frail, to not be stigmatized by anything, right? So it's very likely that the old, big, beige, ugly pendants, right? Panic buttons that you can wear around your neck. I'm sure that they are incredibly useful and that you can use them to get help in case of emergency. However, if people don't want to wear them,
they're useless.
They're useless if they're sitting in a drawer somewhere. But I think luckily companies these days really put an emphasis on design, and most of the wearables today that are designed for older adults are very nicely designed. Even the Apple Watch has a fall detection feature in it. So I think we're in a better place now, luckily.
But then, presumably, if you're using the Apple Watch, you've got to be able to do the touchscreen.
Yes, you got to be able to do the touchscreen. It's a challenge.
My mum can't have an Apple Watch.
It's a challenge. But I think the main thing is that sort of Apple is in some aspects leading the charge in creating beautifully designed products, and other companies are following suit. So there are other wearables out there that are nicely designed. The Apple Watch is just one example.
Okay. But it has this fall detection, which I think is really cool. That I thought was very good.
Yeah.
I didn't know about that before I read your book.
So first of all, I'm glad that you found out about it, because I think it's a really cool feature. And also it tells us a lot about the time that we are in at this day and age, where you see these big tech companies like Apple and Amazon actually creating features. Some might say that they are hidden features in existing products like the Apple Watch, like the Amazon Alexa, to really solve some of the challenges that the older population is facing. And I think this is it's really a step in the right direction, because 10 years ago, there was none of that.
And I think it's also really interesting that you talk at the beginning of the book about how obviously we need age tech now because you're dealing with a generation like me and we're not digital natives, we're digital immigrants. And that I think somebody had sort of thought that when we get to the digital natives getting older, you won't need age tech. And my experience of that is that we will always need age tech because the tech changes and you've always got to be able to keep up with it. So there's two examples for me. I think I confused my mother by getting her an iPad because she'd coped with her PC, she'd coped with a laptop, and then I introduced an iPad and she couldn't make the leap. And now she can't do anything. She doesn't look at her laptop, she doesn't look at her iPad. And I think I confused the issue. But also, while I see myself as very tech savvy, I can build websites, which I'm quite proud of. And I can do a podcast and, things like this. But my contemporaries, and I'm the same, I'm still struggling to keep up with new things. And I have contemporaries who really struggle and won't even, for example, use an e-reader for a book. They're still reading paperbacks. And yes, they love the paperback, but I think it's also, there's an element of, I don't want to be fussing with doing an e-reader or something like that. Or there are certain things, or uploading their photographs to the cloud or things like that, that people of your generation, I'm thinking, would probably just think were completely normal and everyday things. And yet I have contemporaries who are already struggling, which I find really quite shocking, actually. Hopefully people who don't listen to the podcast, people who won't listen to something on their smartphone, which again, I don't understand.
I think you're right about the fact that technology is happening. It's advancing so fast. I mean, it's faster than it's ever been, right? And you have to make a conscious effort to keep up. Mm-hmm. So when people suggest that they might not need special solutions by the time they are older, that is one thing that I tell them. You have no idea how much of an effort you're currently making to stay up to date. And I think a lot of it is about when you're in the workforce and you just have to keep up with the latest gadgets and latest softwares just to remain employed. And there's also an aspect of what value it brings to your life. So if we're looking at older adults who are already retired, they will keep up with technology if they believe it brings value to their lives, right? People have adopted FaceTime and they've adopted Zoom because it helped them stay in touch with their family members. It helped them see their children and grandchildren despite the fact that there was a global pandemic out, right? However, they haven't adopted Slack because they don't need it, right? So yeah. I think motivation is a huge part of it that people miss out, that they might not have. They probably won't have the same motivations when they're older. And also, our body changes. There are physical age-related changes that sort of interrupt our ability to use the current technology that exists in the world today. If your hearing declines, your eyesight declines, your dexterity declines, you have dry skin, and especially if your cognition declines, that affects your ability to control technology. And it's possible that there will be some magic pill to stop biological aging at some point. And it's possible, I think it's also very likely that in a few decades, technology will be ambient and we won't necessarily need user interfaces. We won't necessarily need to say something to Alexa to get her to do something. But our motivations, I think, people at different stages of their lives have different wants, different needs, different motivations, definitely different priorities, which drive a lot of the technology adoption these days.
And tell me about aging in place. What does that mean? Because I know you talk quite a lot about that in the book, and also the fact that most people do want to age in place.
Yes. So aging in place is sort of a pillar of aging of sorts, right? It's a very important concept that obviously gerontologists and people who work in elder care understand and know about. And it's been a consensus among elder care professionals that aging in place, remaining in your home of choice for as long as you live, is preferable for most people. And statistically, that is also the preference of most older adults. And the reason why it's so important, because up until very recently, when governments sort of looked at the demographic trend and they realized that we had an increase in life expectancy and a decrease in fertility and in birth rates, and we simply don't have enough human caregivers to care for all of the older adults who will live on this planet very soon, and some portion
like
of
me.
them you've got a few decades. Some portion of these older adults, these 2 billion people over the age of 60 will be alive on the planet by 2050. Some portion of them will need assistance with the activities of daily living, and we simply don't have enough human caregivers to provide that. So the perception among governments until very recently was, we need to build more care homes, right? Because that's how you take care of people efficiently. You just put them all in one building and you have caregivers in rotating shifts. And that is the efficient way to care for people. However, that clashes with reality when most people don't want to go into care homes. And rightfully so, right? Because people want to live in their home, in their community, in their familiar surroundings, have their tea at their favorite balcony or window, whatever you have in your home. And I think technology could be a really important enabler for aging in place, because it could really reduce a lot of the manual labor caregivers are currently doing. So if you actually look at what human caregivers are currently doing, whether they're family caregivers or paid caregivers, yes, some of that is personal care that it will be very hard to automate in the near future. But a lot of it is around errands, right? Getting groceries, getting prescriptions refilled, transportation, right? Providing rides for people. And a lot of that either can already be automated, at least partially, or will be automated in the near future. So autonomous vehicles, you and I will get to use them in our lifetime. How amazing is that? How amazing will it be for my grandparents who are no longer able to drive if they can just get in the car, enter their destination in the GPS system and get to wherever it is they need to be, right? Because right now, since they haven't been driving for about a decade, they've been limited to wherever they can get a taxi to or wherever they can get a ride to. We'll probably see more robots entering our homes, whether it is as robotic chefs or we already have robotic vacuum cleaners and mops. And I think for some people, this is a dystopian vision. However, if we delegate some or most of the manual labor to robots and automation, we can actually leave humans to do the things that are uniquely human, like providing companionship and comfort, right? When I'm older, I want my children and grandchildren to come to my house and have coffee or tea with me and have a conversation and share like memories, create memories, right? I don't want them to be busy changing the light bulbs or doing the dishes.
Yeah, that's very powerful. That's very powerful. I like that. Mm. And what cultural differences towards aging and age tech have you discovered through your work?
So this is a great question. The research actually on this is somewhat divided, right? Because some research shows that Eastern cultures, especially Asian Eastern cultures, have more respect to their older population than Western cultures. And I think at the end of the day, if you look at it from in the micro level, I think each and every one of us, when we look at our parents and grandparents, we really want them to live life to the fullest and to live their best life, despite any challenges that might come up as they grow older. And unfortunately, because we no longer live in a traditional society, we don't live with our parents or grandparents anymore. So being sort of assuming the role of a family caregiver, which is very likely to happen to each and every one of us who has older loved ones, is much harder today than it was a century ago, right? Not just because there were very few people who actually reached old age, but also because if you live in the same household, things sort of happen by themselves. There is fresh produce in the house, and there is food, and someone's gonna do the cleaning, and you don't really have to make a huge effort and go out of town to provide a ride for your older loved one, because they live with you. You just drop them off, right? The interesting thing that I did find out during the research that I did for the book is that in some countries there is this trend reversal, and people are sort of moving back into multi-generational households, which I think is amazing. And also I think, again, technology can be a great enabler for us to automate a lot of the stuff and really spend more quality time with our older loved ones. And I think I don't know if this is a cultural thing. I think at the end of the day, that's what most people want, even if it's not culturally acceptable to live in the same household anymore. At the end of the day, that's the human experience, right?
And what are you most excited about in terms of what you see coming? Okay, let's talk. I'm going to test you now. I'm going to say, okay, what are you most excited about in the next 5 years, in the next 10, and in the next 20? What do you see coming through that will transform the way older people live?
So in the next 5 years, I'm probably most excited about autonomous vehicles, not just for older adults, but also for purely selfish reasons, because I don't like driving. In the next 10 years, I'm very excited about more automation coming into our homes. So one of the challenges for really making our homes smart homes was sort of this lack of unifying standard for IoT, right? Because if you were to get like
what's IoT?
Internet of Things. So like
yes.
even if you were to get like a smart light bulb, which is like the simplest smart home device, you need to make sure that it actually works with your Amazon Alexa or with your Google Home, whatever smart speaker you have, right? So it was really challenging.
We can't even get them to work with the remote. My husband bought all these smart light bulbs that change color. We never use them.
Exactly. So
it's just too difficult.
So just using the very basic smart home solutions we already have, like light bulbs and ACs and cameras and doorbells, setting all of this up and making it work as a unified smart home system is a challenge, and was mostly reserved for advanced users. However,
I failed. I failed the advanced user test.
It's not your fault. You have to really like read the fine print before you buy. And
can't be bothered.
Yeah, and we don't do that anymore. So now there is this unifying standard, this Matter standard for smart homes that all the big tech companies, Amazon, Apple, Google, are going to be using. That's very likely to also happen in the next 5 years, to really make our homes smart and to really make it easy to get your home sort of leveled up and make it just a little bit smarter. And over the next 10 years, I think, similar to the way that personal emergency response systems sort of have evolved from being button-based to being somewhat automated and having the ability to wear something or have a sensor installed that will detect a fall and call the emergency call center, and you don't have to go reach the button and press it. Similar to that, I think what we'll see sort of the next step in evolution will be sensors sort of embedded in the walls, and we'll have sort of an ambient smart home that will be able to sense our needs and assist us, whether it is in case of emergency, or whether it is just that you've entered your home and you're sweating and you don't need to turn on the AC because your car already senses that you were sweating, and it sort of alerted your home that you will need the AC.
Sounds a bit creepy, that.
It might be, but it also, I like to think of it as it's going to be energy efficient, because the AC will also turn itself off when you get out of the home.
Stop sweating.
or it might just turn itself off when you when you stop sweating. Which, who knows, with global warming it might not happen. So that is that. And also one of the things that I'm very curious to see sort of how it will turn out is the metaverse, which will take a while, possibly 20 years, until we have like holodeck level metaverse experiences. And I think if we do it right, I think it could be incredibly beneficial for older adults in the aspect of, again, of social isolation and loneliness. Because if you think right now, us having this video conversation, it's a nice way to talk. It's certainly nicer than a phone call, but it's not like we're sitting in the same room together. Whereas if we were to have this conversation 20 years from now in the metaverse, it might feel as though we're in the same room. And for people who live hours away from their families, for older adults who live alone, how great would it be if they could just have their grandkids over for tea multiple times a week and not just once every couple of months? How great would it be if we could sort of preserve our life stories, and I could just walk into a holodeck room, for lack of a better word, and take a trip down memory lane with my grandma, and she can show me the town that she grew up in. So I think there's a lot of interesting ways this could go, and if we get it right, I think it could bring a lot of value to our lives. And if we get it wrong, we might end up in the Matrix. Who knows?
Wow, that is exciting. I hadn't thought about that from the metaverse perspective. That is really, yeah. It would be like, well, people have only, as we talked about earlier, they've only just embraced Zoom, a lot of people. I mean, even my mum, she can receive a FaceTime call now on her iPad. She can't make one, but she will receive one. So she can see her nephews and niece and us, and yeah, so that is very powerful. Yeah, that's why we'll need Agetech. We'll need people to explain it all to us, won't we?
Absolutely.
So if you've got one piece of advice for everybody really as they're getting older, so that they can make the most of all of this exciting stuff that's waiting, what would your advice be?
This is a great question. I think the main advice is to be curious and be open to new experience and be open to learning. Again, unfortunately, many people have had bad experiences with technology in the past because they had to use user interfaces that weren't designed with them in mind, to no fault of their own. But I think at the end of the day, if we make an effort, I think technology can really bring a lot of value to our lives. I know it's a big effort for some people, but it can really pay off. And I think Zoom is a great example, and FaceTime is a great example for like two pieces of technology that have paid off big time during the past 2 years, and have really, although I'm sure they were painful to learn for some people, they really brought a lot of value to people's lives and really helped them maintain those social connections and just keep in touch with close family and friends the way that was not possible if we had COVID happen 20 years ago, and it was COVID 1999 instead of COVID-19, that would have been horrible, right? I think we're in a much better place now. So I guess that is my main advice.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Magnificent Midlife podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, follow, and share it. Also, giving a 5-star review really helps get the word out. You'll find the show notes at magnificentmidlife.com. That's also where you can get my book, Magnificent Midlife, Transform Your Middle Years, Menopause, and Beyond. Make the very best of your next chapter. Help me change the world, one magnificent midlife woman at a time.